Let's talk about running backs that you should start, or more importantly, sit heading into week 6 of the fantasy football season. We've got 4 teams on bye this week: the Chiefs, Rams, Dolphins, and Vikings. So you won't have Kareem Hunt, who just had himself a day on Monday Night Football. You won't have Kyron Williams. You won't have the Dolphins, Mostert, Achane. You won't have Aaron Jones, Chandler. A lot of those guys were injured anyway, but you will have to prepare without those guys this week. But don't worry, I got you. We will go through all 28 teams playing. In total, that is 14 matchups, and we're going to break it all down. Let's start with Thursday Night Football. The 49ers at the Seahawks, divisional matchup here in the NFC West. And obviously, Amazon Prime bringing bangers. 47.5-point over-under, and the Niners are favored even though they're traveling to Seattle, and even though they're not over 500. I mean, this team, what is happening in San Francisco? Here's the deal, though. Jordan Mason is clearly a must start. Didn't work out for Jordan last week. Unfortunately, a season low in rushing attempts, but he was still the guy for this team. This team just was down and negative game script the entire time. But we're talking about Jordan Mason, who averaged almost 6.5 yards per attempt. He is definitely going straight back into my lineups. And for the Seahawks, man, they just completely abandoned the run game versus the Giants in a pretty neutral game script all the way through. Doesn't make sense. It's not something we've seen them do very often. I mean, if you look at the first 2 games that Ken Walker has played, he's averaging around 15, 16 rushing attempts per game. The good news for him last week, he had 8 targets. So very clearly, if they're down, if they're up, they're going to use Ken Walker no matter what. He is their dude. Another must start for me for Thursday Night Football. You know, those are just 2 superstars right now in fantasy. You know, sometimes players can bust, sometimes it won't work out, but KISS, keep it simple, stupid, start your superstars. All right, the second game we will look at, it's international, Mr. 305 worldwide, London. All right, London edition. All right, we've got the Jags at the Bears. This is a 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time start, so make sure you are setting your lineups on Sunday night so you don't miss out on this game, especially you West Coast people. But let's talk about the Jags. This is a very difficult backfield to digest, to project moving forward. Travis Etienne is actually playing really well, but he is being outplayed by Tank Bigsby. We heard a report just today from Doug Peterson. They said, hey, is Tank going to take over this job? Is it slowly moving towards him? And Doug replies and basically says, no, absolutely not. This is still Travis Etienne's backfield. He's still our number 1 guy. He's our dude. He's our workhorse. So that tells us that if Travis Etienne is healthy, then Etienne is still going to be the name to play, but we don't know about Etienne's health right now because he is dealing with that shoulder injury. So this will be a very difficult one to comprehend throughout the entire week. Technically a good matchup. I mean, we saw Chuba Hubbard play really well against his team last week, even though his offense wasn't firing on all cylinders. So we will label Travis Etienne a must start. We'll label Tank Bigsby a spot start because if Etienne is healthy, they still want to give Etienne the rock. But let's play out the scenario where Etienne is not healthy. He is ruled out. Tank Bigsby becomes a must start, a top 20 play for me in fantasy football this week. Now, as far as the Bears side of the ball, man, they really found their identity. They're asking Caleb Williams to throw the ball less. They are putting 2 tight ends out there a lot more, running the ball more effectively, less dropbacks, more rushing attempts. DeAndre Swift is that dude for this team. 21 rushing attempts this week, which was a season high. And he also had 2 targets through the air, so 23 touches altogether. And even better, he's looking really good. I mean, in the first 3 weeks, we're talking about Swift, who was averaging 1.8 yards per carry. He has now picked it up drastically, averaging over 4.5 yards per carry in the last 2 weeks combined. He's being used in the air. He's being used on the ground. He looks good. He looks dynamic. They're giving him some goal line opportunities, but they're also giving Rashawn Johnson some goal line opportunities. So look, you can play Rashawn if you want, but he is a touchdown or bust player. You have to recognize that. Last week, he had 1 touchdown, 8 points. This week, he has 2 touchdowns, 14 points. That is not something that you can rely on. Touchdowns are the least sticky stat to chase. So I personally wouldn't be starting Rashawn unless you're in a desperate situation. And then, of course, you can put him out there because the matchup isn't actually that bad. The Jags are top 5 in points allowed to running backs. All right, this brings us to the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. Commanders at Ravens. Personally, I'm very excited about this one. I am a Commanders fan. Love seeing Jaden Daniels do his thing. 51.5 over under. So clearly the sports books in Vegas are also excited because this is the highest over under of the week. It's tied with one other game actually for the highest over under of the week. But here's what's weird. FanDuel Sportsbooks right now at the time of recording this has Washington as 6.5-point dogs. I mean, technically it's at home for Baltimore, but these guys are living right next to each other, right? Baltimore, Washington, D.C., so close. With Washington being 4-1 and the defense improving, I'm kind of surprised that there's such a big difference in that spread. But regardless, there's a lot of must starts here. Brian Robinson must start. The Ravens defense is tough, all right? The Ravens defense gives up the 5th fewest points to fantasy running backs at the time of recording this video. But Brian Robinson is a part of an offense that rarely punts. He's a part of the most efficient offense through 5 weeks of the NFL season. There are so many trips to the red zone. There are so many opportunities for him to score a touchdown. In fact, right now, he's averaging a touchdown per game. There's only 1 week, week 2, where he didn't score a touchdown. He's the RB9 through 5 weeks. I know he's dealing with that knee injury, but if he's out there, he's got to be in your lineups. Look, Eckler is as well a fine spot start. So definitely something to consider moving forward. Eckler saw a higher percent of the snaps because the Commanders felt no need to play Brian Robinson in the second half. They were up by 3 touchdowns. Brian Robinson didn't play any of the second half, but this should be a game where they're going to need their backs a little bit more. As far as Derrick Henry, number 1 running back in fantasy football so far. If y'all don't know, I have him over in the Flock League. They said he was washed. How about now? How about now? That boy is rolling. Absolutely must start continually every single week, regardless of matchup. All right, at number 4, let's talk Cardinals at Packers. 49.5 over under. The Packers are favored, and this is the 3rd highest over under of the week. So we should see a lot of fantasy points in this one. Let's start with the Cardinals. James Conner, the RB10 through 5 weeks. My RB13 in my rankings this week, absolute must start. The guy is dominating touches. 22 touches this week. 19 the week before. In week 2, 22 touches, and in week 1, 20 touches. In an offense that is pretty good, middle of the pack. So this is a guy, when they're on the goal line, they're going to look to him. He has 3 touchdowns so far on the year. Definitely a name that needs to be in your lineups. And the Packers are a decent matchup. They're middle of the pack. Now, as far as Josh Jacobs goes, has his best week as a Green Bay Packer for fantasy football, scores his first touchdown. And now we're talking about Josh Jacobs, who faces the Cardinals, a top 10 matchup for your fantasy running back. Start him with confidence. Now that Jordan Love is back and this offense is kind of finding their way, Josh Jacobs should be even better for fantasy football. Think a little bit Brian Robinson, as in that offense is so good, so Brian Robinson has so many chances to score a touchdown. I know, different quarterbacks, but think about how the offense is going to help Josh Jacobs now with Jordan Love there. He also played a season high in snaps last week, 75% of the snaps for this team. All right, moving on to the Texans at the Patriots, 38.5 over under, which is the 3rd lowest of the week. The Texans are heavily favored in this one for good reason, right? The Patriots aren't a good team. New England are 7-point underdogs in this one. And let's start with the Patriots. I would rule Ramondre Stevenson still as a must start. So he comes in this week and the coach says, you know what? He needs to know he can't fumble the ball. Gibson's going to start. Now, if you were with us on our live streams, which we do every day on the channel, the way we translated that was this is a punishment, but Stevenson is still the start. Stevenson is still going to get most of the work. And they're just trying to motivate him. And that's what ended up happening. Gibson did start the game, but Gibson only ends this game with 7 touches while Stevenson has 16. Stevenson scores a touchdown, averages over 7 yards per carry. So clearly Stevenson is still their offense. So I get it. There's going to be some bust games because this isn't a good offense. It's not the Commanders. It's not the Packers, right? But this is still a name that I believe you have to put in your lineup unless you're in like an 8 or a 10 team league. Now, for the Texans, please, God, I'm begging you, because I have this guy in the Flock League. Can Joe Mixon finally come back? Damn it, we are missing a top 6 to 7 play every single week with Joe Mixon. It's so frustrating. But at the time of recording this, I don't know. I really don't know if he's going to play or not. You have got to stick close to practice reports throughout the week. They asked the head coach, Ryans, they said, hey, is he going to play? He said, I don't know. So even the head coach is like, I don't know what's going on. But if he plays, you definitely are going to play Joe Mixon, a top 12 matchup for your fantasy running backs. The Patriots are. But let's play the scenario out where if Mixon does not play, I actually think Dare Ogunbowale is the play over Cam Akers. Why? Because if you're seeing the last couple weeks, there's a trend here where Ogunbowale is starting to get more and more work in this offense. Last week, Ogunbowale played 68% of the snaps. He has 22 total touches. And Cam Akers, yes, scored the touchdown, but he only had 12 touches. 10 less touches for Cam Akers last week. So they're both spot starts in a decent matchup. But if I had to choose a name, only if Mixon is out, that would be Dare Ogunbowale. He's kind of a cheap name to add out there in waiver wires this week, by the way, if you guys are looking for a spot start option. The sixth matchup we will look at is the Bucs at the Saints, another divisional matchup, 45.5 point over under. Now, at the time of recording this, the Saints are technically favored, but I just finished watching Monday Night Football and Derek Carr was injured. If Derek Carr does not play in this game, it will be heavy favorites on the Bucs. It just will be, all right? People don't know anything about Jake Haener. We have no idea if he can lead this team to a victory, but let's talk about the running backs in this game. All right, so let's start with the Bucs. First off, Saints are a good defense against running backs. We saw what Kareem Hunt did last week, but of course, Kareem Hunt is in a great offense. He's behind a great offensive line. Those two things sometimes win out. But for the Bucs backfield, the coaching staff 2 weeks ago said, you know what, Bucky has earned more snaps. And in the last 2 weeks, Rachaad White is averaging 10 carries and 3 targets a game. Bucky Irving is averaging 9.5 carries and 2 targets per game. It's becoming very obvious that they'd like to use both of these running backs. So we have seen Bucky Irving go from about 30% of the snaps all the way up to 43% of the snaps. And you're seeing Rachaad White's snap percentage also come down pretty much each and every week. So the reality is, can you start these names? Sure. Is the matchup good? No. Are you guaranteed to get touches for either of these guys? No. Did more than 70% of Rachaad White's points come from one rush last week? That is very impossible to predict if it ever happens again. Yes. So can you start them? Sure. Do I feel good about it? Would I want to start them? No. Now, there is a scenario here where Rachaad White might be dealing with an injury. Okay. This isn't being widely reported on right now at the time of recording this, but at the end of the game last week versus the Falcons, Rachaad White did injure himself. I don't know if that's going to limit him this week, but just in case, if Rachaad White is out, Bucky Irving does become a must start because he's a good player and a good offense, and that means he would get a bunch of volume. So he's my RB20. Again, only if we're going to be missing a name like Rachaad White. Now, as far as Alvin Kamara, look, I don't really care if not Derek Carr is going to be there. Clearly, it would be helpful to have Derek Carr, but either way, Alvin Kamara is going to get he's going to get his targets. He's a name that you have got to play, in my opinion. I just don't think there's any scenario. I mean, honestly, they could put Rashid Shaheed at quarterback, and I'd still tell you to start Alvin Kamara. Just being honest with you guys, all right? All right, on to the seventh matchup of the week is Browns at Eagles, 43.5 point over under, and the Eagles are heavy favorites. Cleveland are 8.5 point dogs. The dogs are dogs. And this is not in the dog pound, all right? But I'm not Dr. Seuss, but I'm not a rapper. Okay, let's start with the Browns here. This is getting disgusting, all right? This is getting disgusting. It's getting unpredictable. And I haven't even talked about if Nick Chubb is going to be playing this week. Nobody knows. If Nick Chubb plays this week, I don't want to play Nick Chubb. If Nick Chubb doesn't play this week, I don't want to play Jerome Ford, and I don't want to play Deonta Foreman. That defensive line for the Eagles is better than people realize, and we're seeing a situation in Cleveland where I don't even think they know what they want to do with their running backs. Every week it's a different story, right? In week 2, Jerome Ford was out-touched by Deonta Foreman. Then the next 2 weeks, we saw Jerome Ford be the guy. Then this week versus Washington, we see Deonta Foreman get 10 touches compared to Jerome Ford's 12, and all of Jerome Ford's good plays came in garbage time when the Commanders had their second defense on the team anyway, on the field. So how were you supposed to, I am not interested in playing any of these names. If I had to choose a name, it's probably Jerome Ford, but I just think 90% of people have a better option, if I'm honest with you. All right, talking about the Eagles though, of course you get Saquon Barkley back. If you had him on your team and he was on bye, congratulations, you get the RB1 back into your roster this week. Guys, he is third in fantasy points and he hasn't played an extra game compared to everybody else, right? He just had his bye week. Overall in fantasy football, he is the 9th highest scoring player. And again, he hasn't played a game compared to everybody else. So absolute monster this year behind a great offensive line. All right, at the 8th matchup we will look at, that is Colts at Titans, another divisional matchup, 42.5 point over under. The Colts are favored, even though it's at Tennessee. Look, if Jonathan Taylor plays, of course you're going to put him out there. But if Trey Sermon is a starter, last week we said go start him. Then we featured Trey Sermon on our players that would dominate video. He goes out, he has 18 points. He touches the ball 16 times, including 6 targets. He gets the touchdown on the goal line. So look, if Trey Sermon starts again, he's a top 24 play for me. The Titans are a much more difficult matchup than the Jaguars, but purely based off of volume and behind that offensive line, I still think you can play him. But let's play the scenario out where Jonathan Taylor does play. If he does play, of course, Trey Sermon, my RB42, would no longer be a player we are even thinking about starting in our lineups. Now, as far as the Titans go, this is a great matchup for them. The Colts are top 10 in points allowed to fantasy running backs this year, and we've got Tony Pollard coming off a 24-touch game versus the Dolphins, averaging over 4 yards per carry, got into the end zone. I think Tony Pollard is an absolute must-start, certified start, and he's the guy that they want to give most of the carries to. Now, Tajay Spears did score a touchdown last time out versus Miami. He still only ends up with 11.9 PPR points. He's definitely in that spot start category purely because of the matchup, but it's quite obvious who they want to give the ball to on the ground if they can. And we saw Tajay with 15 carries last week, but that is an outlier when you look at the rest of his season. And the reason he got so many carries was because the Titans were playing the Dolphins, and the Dolphins couldn't move the ball to save their life. All right, I think we know that by now. All right, moving on to the 9th matchup this week, Chargers at Broncos. This is the start of the afternoon slate of games, okay? So 1 p.m. slate of games are done. Now you've got 4 matchups that we can look at. Chargers at Broncos, an AFC West showdown, 36.5 point over under. Not what you want to see. It is the lowest over under of the week, at least tied for the lowest over under of the week with another matchup. So I don't really want to chase this matchup if I'm honest with you. Like, J.K. Dobbins is the only name I'm really interested in. And J.K. Dobbins is a name that in the first 2 weeks thrived off of efficiency, didn't have as many touches as you want. And in the last 2 weeks, weeks 3 and 4 before their bye week, he had so much volume, but played really difficult defenses and just couldn't overcome those defenses. So I think now in a matchup versus Denver, which is a decent defense, like they're pretty good, but what you don't want to do is throw on the Denver Broncos. What you want to try to do is beat them on the ground. And with J.K. Dobbins, who in week 4, 17 touches, and week 3, 18 touches, Gus Edwards' role is completely irrelevant at this point. He has been relegated to a no name, to just a guy that they use sparingly when they have to. J.K. Dobbins is a clear workhorse on his offense. You can play him. He's a must start. Now look, Javonte Williams. Can you play Javonte Williams? Sure, you can put him out there. 2 weeks ago, 19 touches. 1 week ago, 19 touches. So he's starting to get more and more of the work. This offense is starting to look better and better and better. However, you have to be aware that with a name like Sean Payton, on any given week, he can make anybody the running back in his backfield. So, can you play Javonte Williams? Yes. Is it a good matchup? No. Is there expected to be a lot of points in this game? No. Is he your best option? You tell me, because that will be the answer of if you should start him or not. All right. The 10th matchup we will look at here is the Steelers at the Raiders. Back-to-back games, tied for the lowest over-under of the week here. 36.5 points. The Steelers are favored. Look, Najee Harris, I mean, I think there'll be plenty of people telling you to start Najee Harris this week because he plays the Raiders, and the Raiders give up the 5th most points to fantasy running backs. Sure, but, I mean, last week he played Dallas. Dallas was a top 5 matchup. The week before that, at the time, he played the Colts. The Colts were a top 5 matchup. Jaylen Warren's been out both weeks. Najee Harris has been completely mediocre across the board. I mean, he's had every opportunity to be good for fantasy. His offensive line hasn't been good, but he's had every opportunity to be good for fantasy, and he has failed to do so. So I'll name him a spot start because of the matchup. You can play him, but I think 70% of people probably have a name that gets them more excited this week. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, let's talk about Alexander Mattison. Alexander Mattison comes in week 5. I know there was a Zamir White injury, but he is the lead dog in that backfield. 18 total touches, 10 fantasy points. If you're going to start a name this week, it would be Madison for me. I don't think Zamir White plays with that groin injury. Maybe he does, but regardless, if he does play, I still don't want to start Zamir White. It's just, we've moved on from Zamir White at this point. Emotionally, physically, in every way we possibly can in this lifetime. All right, the 11th matchup we'll look at, an NFC South matchup. Falcons at Panthers, 48.5 point over under. So that kind of surprised me. I mean, clearly Vegas thinks that the Panthers are going to bounce back offensively, And let's start with Chuba Hubbard. Man, Chuba Hubbard, the RB7 through 5 weeks, and he looks so freaking good. It's crazy. I mean, he's averaging like over 6.5 yards per carry right now on the year, and they're feeding him the ball. He's getting so many touches. He is pretty much the offense for these guys, the one name that you have got to start. My RB16 this week, it is not a good matchup versus the Falcons, but a guy who has that much volume. I mean, guys, this team was down like 3 touchdowns, and they still decided to run the ball multiple times with Chuba Hubbard. They were not going to abandon the run. So Chuba's definitely a name I'm playing. Now, as far as Bijan Robinson, I have him ranked as the RB4. I want to be clear, though. Last week on our video, we said it's time to lower expectations for Bijan Robinson. We said that before Thursday Night Football, and we basically said, let's look at the touches per game. You can see in week 1, Bijan was dominating. Then it got closer in week 2 and week 3. In week 4, it got very close. And in week 5, 15 touches to 9 for Tyler Algier. So look, I am aware that we should lower expectations for Bijan. But the reason he's so high in my rankings this week is because of that matchup. The Panthers give up the second most points to fantasy running backs. You can beat these guys on the ground. So I'm definitely starting Bijan Robinson with a ton of confidence. And honestly, you can start Tyler Algier if he's truly your best option. All right, the 12th matchup we will look at here is the Lions at the Cowboys. 51.5 point over under, and the Lions are favored even though it's in Dallas. And this is tied for the highest over under of the week. So we should, in theory, see a lot of fantasy points in this one. Let's start with the Lions. Cowboys are a top 10 matchup. Oddly enough, both Lion running backs, Gibbs and Montgomery, were top 10 in fantasy points before the bye week. These guys are both must starts. They're both dominating for fantasy football. They look so good, so efficient. They're both getting goal line opportunities. They're both behind one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, on one of the best offenses in the NFL. So these are 2 names that you have to start regardless of what format you're in. Now, let's talk about Rico Dowdle. He is on the edge of a spot start and a must start for me. I will recognize that in the last 2 weeks, he has really gotten a hold of this backfield entirely. Dominating touches. He had 20 rushing attempts last week, which is definitely a career high. 22 total touches. He caught the touchdown in the end zone. Can you play him? Yes, you can. Especially if you're in like a 12-team format. But just keep in mind, this is not a good matchup. The Lions are one of those matchups where you look at it and you're like, I'm not sure I want to play a running back against this team. Only Ken Walker's done it this year. Everyone else has been shut down. You got to make that call for yourself. All right, Sunday Night Football. We've got the Bengals at the Giants here. 48.5 point over under. The Bengals are favored, and it is spot start city across the board. Why? Let's talk Bengals first. Zach Moss dealing with an injury. Will he play? I don't know at the time of recording this. If Zach Moss doesn't play, definitely start Chase Brown with a ton of confidence. If Zach Moss plays, things get a little bit more confusing because it feels like both Zach Moss and Chase Brown are going to split time this entire year. But we are seeing trends where Chase Brown is slowly but surely getting more snaps, taking over more of the workload. And even last week, he had more touches than a name like Zach Moss. So look, hopefully we get more clarity and I can tell you guys on the live streams what I would do. But at this moment, I'm labeling them both a spot start. We just need some more information before we can make a clear decision. As far as the Giants go, this is easy. You can start Devin Singletary if he plays. If he doesn't, Tyrone is also in play. Now, if Devin Singletary does play, Tyrone Tracy is not a name you're putting out there. You're not going to chase last week if Devin Singletary plays. All right, last matchup of the week, Monday Night Football. Bills at Jets, 42.5 point over under. If you guys remember last year, this is the game where Aaron Rodgers tore his Achilles. Remember? It was that meme with him running out with the flag. So I'm sure he's ready to put this behind him. But Two must starts for me, James Cook and Breece Hall. Let's start with the Jets side of the ball. So Breece Hall, it's not been good so far. He's been inefficient. He has not looked like the same player. He's starting to lose touches each and every week. In fact, in week 1, he had 22 touches to 2 for Braylon Allen. But each and every week since then, it's getting closer and closer. 15 to 9 touches in week 4. 13 to 7 touches in week 5. Now, this is the week that Breece Hall has to bounce back. Why? Because the Buffalo Bills give up the most points to fantasy running backs this year. If Breece Hall doesn't bounce back this week, we're going to have a serious conversation about how we view him rest of season. We might already be having that conversation at this point. Now, because of the matchup, you could also spot start Braylon Allen if you're in a desperate situation, but I think most teams probably have a better option. He's just not getting enough volume right now to warrant a start at this point. Now, as far as the Bills go, of course, you're starting James Cook. RB5 on the season, got into the end zone last week versus the Houston Texans. He's only had really one bad game. That was versus Baltimore, which was a tough matchup. Now he's, facing the Jets, which is a good defense. But when you have Josh Allen, when you have this offense that he's a part of, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to score a touchdown. So I'm definitely going to label him a must start. I appreciate you guys watching the video. Do me a favor, go ahead and hit the like button on this video to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. And the last thing I will say is if you have a specific question for me, let's say it's a start sit question, a trade question, you want your team reviewed, check out the pinned comment. There's a link to our website where you can support us and ask a question. You can reach us at literally any time. I appreciate you for watching this video. Good luck this week. Wide receiver start sits are coming out later in the day. I got you with the double release. I'll see you soon. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.